That'll just be a slight delay. Maybe you just started it.
I just started it.
Okay. Welcome everybody. It's the Awesome Drupal Users Group. A few things that we'll talk about first. If you're not already on our Slack, then you can join it. The link is here. It's also on the meetup page. And it's in like the YouTube comments and lots of places, but it's adug-slack.herokuapp.com. If you hadn't heard about it, there was a security release of panels for Drupal 7 today that you should look into upgrading. I'd like to thank Amazing Labs for the pizza and here, and Camel Factory for hosting. We are looking for a speaker for next month. So if you want to speak, or you have an idea of what you want to hear, or something, or anything, then let me know or post on Slack, and we'll do something about that.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's it for news. Our presenter tonight is Jeff, and he'll be talking about Composer.
Yes.
And I guess that's it. Without further ado, it's all yours.
Excellent. All right. So I've got to navigate all of these things I have open here. Well, I thought that, yeah, just one actually, and poorly executed at that. So we're going to talk about Composer, and we have a meme to start it out. And then as I was looking at all this, I was, and also a brief story. Recently, I got married, which was great. And as when you do that, and I guess a lot of other things in your life, you end up having to throw parties. And so I found myself multiple times, me and my wife, figuring out who to invite. So you invite Uncle Joe, you have to invite Cousin Mary, and if Cousin Mary comes, well, then maybe your jerk husband's going to show up, and you know you can't trust him around the open bar and things like that, and so you can't invite that uncle, and then you can't invite the other uncle, and so those things kind of end up happening. And I was like, wow, it'd be cool if we could have some sort of social dependency thing. Where you can figure out who you could, maybe you can order Uncle Mike, you could invite Uncle Mike from like 5 years ago because he was great, but now, he's got a new wife and she's kind of mean, and so we don't want her. So you could kind of go back in time and do that, but we can't really do that. If you weren't paying attention beforehand, there's some materials that we're going to use, and those are up on, they're in the meetup page. I have to change where I want to point to.
I got it up here.
Okay, yeah. Okay, cool. I'm also going to change on here because I'm going to be in that one for a while. Oh, perfect. That's what I want. Sorry. Okay. Apologize for the dead air time there. So what we're going to do is we're not just going to look at what you have to do, because I found lots of explanations and tutorials about, what you do, and very few of them are interested in explaining why or how or where things came from. And so I spent a lot of time on this particular repository at adug from scratch build with the README there, showing you how I made it. So you can follow that later if you want, but we're going to go through it as part of the presentation, whatever you want to call this. So first, we're going to talk about what Composer is. Then we're going to talk about how it relates to Drupal 8. Then we're going to talk about why we have to use it, how it works. Then we're going to walk through, like I was just talking about, the process of, instantiating a new instance of Drupal 8 using Composer. And then we may do another one. We'll see if we have time or if you have questions or whatever. Please feel free to interrupt me. I have notes so I can find out where I was, and you may not remember your question later. So where it came from, two guys 5 years ago or so, kind of started it. One, I'm going to butcher their names probably, but Jordi Baggiano and Nils Adderman. And with most open source projects, there's been, not countless, but quite a few other people who have been involved with developing since then. And so why are we going to even do this at all? So we probably have a little bit of a wide variety of expertise and experience here. So if you know this, just sorry, be patient. Why is dependency control needed at all? Well, as in my example at the parties, you end up writing software, and if you want to use pieces of software that other people have written, it's important because people keep writing that software and they keep advancing it and keep doing all sorts of things to it, putting new functionality. And if you're using a particular functionality that later gets dropped or changed or altered beyond recognition, you need to be able to point to that original version. And so keeping track of all of those versions becomes very important when you start using code that you are not directly in charge of, so to speak. You don't have it under your control. And so to manage those dependencies, we need tools like this. Version control is another reason. If you're not using version control, I think most people are. There was a time when I think all of us weren't. If you're keeping your code under version control, then managing those dependencies in some way is important. You could be managing the entire code base under version control, which is what some people do, or you can just maintain pointers to where to go find that code, which is more like what Composer does. Lost my spot. So if you've used NPM or Bundler or I don't know, other dependency managers you guys may have seen or used, you already kind of have the idea about that. So Drupal 8 and Composer. You probably heard Symfony and all these Symfony things, and Symfony and Composer are, I don't know, they're like cousins, kind of. Symfony likes Composer and needs it to install, and so now Drupal needs it to install, more or less. A lot of things I'm going to say aren't concrete. They're just sort of like, well, yes, you could semantically argue, but that's kind of the way it works. Still, some of the, I don't know, tutorials, documentation are still getting sorted out in Drupal 8. And on Drupal.org, and the official docs are, they're all pointed in the right place, but a lot of them have subtle details that are different, which will make it really hard on you. So we've got some, we'll try to explain the way to do it right now, which may not be the way to do it in 2 months. But hopefully it'll stay. It's stabilizing rather rapidly, I think. Contrib modules that you find on Drupal.org, and in 7 you may have used Drush to download those, or you could download the tarball directly from the site. You go to Drupal.org and you find your module and you download it and copy it into your modules folder. Well, now the contrib modules are required to have a composer.json file, it tells Composer where to find them. Now, not all of them do, but that's okay. And saying that they're required to is a bit of a, they aren't really. They're being encouraged to add them, and if they don't add them, then magically behind the scenes, Drupal.org is putting a JSON file there so that Composer can go out and find these. Hopefully, so for example, if you've used some module in Drupal 7 where you had to install external libraries that do, I don't know, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but they'll have the library. So address field. So you end up having to install these libraries from other places, and you have to copy them into the libraries folder. And if you're doing some kind of managed deployment, it gets kind of complicated and weird. Those may not have Composer files yet. They may not be working straight with Composer. You may still have to do your library nonsense. Or if you really get fun, you can use Composer to kind of spoof a Composer file for them to pull those in, which works pretty good. Eventually, however, all of the pretty much everything on Drupal.org that you can download or that you can find through Git should have a Composer file. so that it can be included in a Composer project. So why do we have to use Composer now? There's all these new tools coming out all the time, and a lot of them, you know, it's like, what? I don't want to use Mustache or whatever. If you've been to any of the recent, say, past year and a half, 2 years of community events, you've heard Getting Off the Island. There are many other PHP projects that use Composer. It's kind of the de facto standard for dependency management in PHP right now, and it doesn't look like it's going to go anywhere. Once you learn how to use it, it really helps. It'll really help you, keep you from breaking stuff. Learning to use it, you'll break lots of things, but it's forgiving if you follow the correct steps. It's very forgiving, I think, and it's going to be sort of the official way to do it in Drupal 8 going forward, and to 9 and 10, and well, who knows? There'll probably be some other dependency manager then, but in principle, it's kind of the way forward. It's hard to say what, you know, new things will be on the horizon because they're not here yet. It's part of a version-controlled workflow where you have development, staging, and production. It's very useful to be able to duplicate settings across multiple platforms. And with the new, what would I call it? Configuration management in Drupal 8, it's really cool. It's a little bit, the light has almost come on for me with it, but there's still things that are quite confusing, but it works well with using Composer and keeping configuration version controlled. So keeping all of your site information in code that is not content. And then if you really feel like having a good time, you can put some content in there too. You just, it's not for the faint-hearted still. One last reason why I want to use it is this cool thing called the Autoloader. And so if you use an IDE like PHP Storm or whatever to develop new modules, do things like that, some of you may never ever do that. But if you do, then the Autoloader is cool because what it does is it goes through all of the dependencies in your project, in your Composer package. I should call them packages. Some of them are projects, some of them are not. It goes through and finds all those functions and puts them in this one file. So whatever you're using goes to the one file and finds these function names. And they're namespaced, and part of the magic is that you don't get namespace collisions in theory because all your dependencies are found out on the front end of all of that. So Autoloader, we'll talk a little bit more about it here in a second. Or I may have said everything I want to say already, I don't know. But it's also part of the reason that we need to use it. So here's a little bit about how it works. There are two primary components to building a Composer project. And when I say two, there's actually a lot more, but two is the composer.json file, which is just a, I don't know what you would call it. It's a text file with, a bit like an old XML file or something like that. There's been, you've probably seen one. And then the Composer lock file. Composer.json file is the one that you play with and you change things. The Composer.lock file, you do nothing but commit with that. Never, ever, ever edit it. Let Composer edit it. And that's really the thing to remember about it. Always keep track of it in version control with any version of a deployment, or just, it's how Composer knows how and where to put everything in your project, and it's automatically generated, and you don't want to change any of it. So dependencies, I was going to talk about a little bit. Does everyone understand sort of? Well, never mind, I'll talk about it anyway. So dependencies are recursive, and I brought a visual. So yeah, it's fun. I don't know if it's a very good visual, but so, oh my gosh. So here's my pink project. And it has a green project inside of it. And wow, okay, now everything's great. I have 2 boxes. Life is wonderful. And you know what? I don't know what's in that. Oh, wait. Okay, so there's a purple box too, right? So now we have green, purple boxes. Okay, and all I really know is that I need the green box. I didn't know the green box came with a purple box. I didn't know it came with a yellow box. And so there's this is it really goes on for a while. there's a whole, I didn't make this. There's just a bunch of boxes in here, and they get down to very tiny. But the point is,
Go on.
okay, well, let's keep going. We'll keep going. I think I can keep talking while we do it. Is this top level red or pink box is your package, and in that package you require the green box. You don't care about any of these other boxes down the line. They don't matter, and it can keep going. All of these little packages depend on other things, and they keep going. It's got to be towards the end soon. But this is what can happen, and this is one of the reasons that dependency management is important, because you don't want to keep track of all of this crap, and you don't really have any control. I think there's 2 more. Oh, that's it. Brown box is the last box. So those are, yeah. So, but in our context, you maybe only know about these 2, and everything else is found in this green box all the way down. All of these packages you don't have to care about. All of the functions in these come on this nice list up here. You don't need to worry about where they are, what version they're on, or anything, because this guy's composer.json file is worried about all of these. And you're not responsible for this project out in Never Never Land. You should pay attention, but you really don't have to care very much. Okay, so those are all on the way now. Okay, so there's my visual, and that's recursive. And there's another. So we talked about the 2 files, and there's 2 main commands in Composer. One is update, and one is install. I'm just going to save those for when we get to the demo, but they're important. Update, install. So one of the things you'll notice when you're working with Composer is occasionally it just takes forever, and you're going, I don't know what's going on. Why is it taking so long? And sometimes it doesn't take very long at all. So the reason that is because certain packages will be stored in your local cache and certain ones will not. The ones that will not are the ones that are taking so long to download, primarily because they're being cloned from a Git repository. And if they're not, what would you call it, a release, if they don't have a version number attached to them in a master branch, then it goes out and it clones where it can find them. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. But your local cache, you could, if everything's acting weird, I'll show you a command later, you can clear the local cache and re-update, and it'll start bringing everything in and just kind of piles them up over here in the corner for whatever projects you need them. And your cache is global, but don't worry about it. Pretty much you shouldn't have to do anything with it. And if the cache goes wonky, it's because you've done something else really, really weird. And then you start Googling furiously about your error messages. So the autoloader, already mentioned this. I wrote this more carefully. It says a namespace functions, a registry of namespace functions supplied by all of the currently installed dependencies, not just your ones in your root JSON file. Because remember, all of these other boxes have Composer files in them. And it knows, that's how it knows where to find the functions that you call, and also cool things in an IDE like autocomplete and whatever sort of little tools that you use to find what you need. Okay, great. So that's kind of what it is, what we're working with. And so now we're going to go through the demo. And I'm not actually going to do the demo. If you want to do it along, you can. But it will be there for you later. And we could do it, but I mean, you just see me type something in and some green stuff come up on the screen. So I mean, we can, but I've tried it a few times. It should work. Oops, what happened? Okay, there it is. Yes. So in required software, I didn't list everything you need. I'm kind of, it's kind of mean, I suppose, but I'm going on the assumption that, a couple of assumptions really, and some of you may be angry at me, but that you can use the command line. This is all in the command line. At some point, there may be some sort of graphic interface for it. I kind of doubt it. The commands get kind of simple. But yeah, I mean, there's just no way around it. You must use the command line for this. And I don't know what else I was going to say about that. So it's really as simple as create a new directory, and then you want to type in composer.init, or like you would type in for a new Git project, git init. And so what that does is initiates a new project. you can do something fun just by saying no interaction, which is an option. If you get tired of filling out this wizard I'm going to show you, you can just do that, and it dumps out essentially a blank composer file. That blank composer file is the only thing you need. You'll need a name in it, honestly. But beyond that, now it's a composer project. That's all that makes it a composer project. In here, I'm going through one by one. You can read it. You can go check out where it points to in the docs. I'd recommend doing that later. For the cloned project here, this is the important part. Oh, wow. Sorry, I didn't realize it was going so far behind me. I apologize. We'll get down to it in a second. It's also tiny. So following along on your machine might be easier. Well, what I do is you go through and you do these different commands and I'll show you the way that your new file should look if you're getting lost. So we've initiated a new project. We've come through and here's some fun answers. There's a couple that I want to mention because they're very important. One is the name, the package name. So if you want to be able, and in this case, what we're doing is we're creating a root level project package to make a Drupal site. I can't really think of any scenarios where this would be required or a dependency of another project. Maybe there's going to be some kind of weird multi-site thing in the future where you could do that. I don't know, but for right now, it doesn't really matter. You could name it about whatever you wanted to. However, if it's going to be a different kind of package, which I'll show you guys at the end if we have time and if you're interested, like a profile, it becomes very important what the vendor and name of your package are, because that's how you'll require it in another composer package, which I'll show you a little bit further down here. So following along, the name is very important, and we'll just kind of ignore that and move on to the next command. So as part of how Drupal is evolving, Drupal 8 and Drupal org, so because you can use Composer with 7 as well. Composer uses something called Packagist, which is this great thing in the sky where it goes and it finds out what all of the modules are and where they are. And you put in, if you say, hey, Composer, I want this project from wherever, you give it a vendor name and you give it a project name. And the vendor names, Packagist make sure that they are unique. And so you don't get namespace collisions. And then you have, I think that's the way that works. It may not be. And then, excuse me, then there's the package name. And so that's how it goes out and finds it. And so that whole repository of all of these different packages in the world isn't local. It goes out and it looks at Packagist. Drupal, for various reasons, you can read a lot about it. I put some links on there, and if you want to, but is not going to be storing its package information on Packagist. Drupal has its own version of Packagist that it's going to use. Some of that has to do with versioning and some other things. But for now, that's really all you need to kind of pay attention to. If you want to read the links, you'll see more about it. And so the command here is composer config repositories.drupal, composer, and then the URL for the Drupal packages site, if you want to call it that. There's a separate URL for Drupal 7 and for Drupal 8. So what this means, when you are working with, first of all, when you're working with this version of Packagist, there's another one, okay? And you'll find the other one in a lot of the examples, and I'll show it to you guys in a little while. But this seems to be the Drupal org endorsed way to go forward. They're putting time and energy and money into it. And so this is going to be the way to do it. Until, I don't know, February of next year, there's another thing that works, which is packages.drupal. And don't use that one. I mean, you'll have to change it. There's nothing wrong with using it for right now, but you're going to have to change it anyway. So might as well go with the one that has, I don't know, forward compatibility, if you want to call it that. And so this pulls in, and so something to notice is there's URL for 8 and URL for 7. And that means when you are trying to get a package in, and it's a Drupal contributed module, and its version isn't 8.x point whatever. It's actually everything after the 8 is what version it is. Well, yes. We'll see an example of that, but it's important that the 7 and the 8 don't matter. Whichever repository you're using, it assumes that's a Drupal 8 or a Drupal 7 site. So when you require a module from Drupal, it points to one of those. Something else in this file that's fun. So, and I'll show you in the next section, but you can just say composer require drush /drush, which is drush is the vendor, drush is the package. That happens to be on Composer's packagist. It's not isolated to a Drupal org. Sorry. That's all right. I can't remember what I was saying though. Okay, yeah, so that's very cool. When you're looking at the file, so what you can do is you can just type in composer require drush, and then it brings it in. But you get to tell the file I'm sorry, you get to tell composer restraints and constraints on which version you're bringing in. So if you're following along, we have dev, alpha, beta, RC for release candidate, and stable. You can set any of those as the minimum stability of a package that you want Composer to automatically import. You can always tell Composer exactly what package to import, and that you put a colon on the end of the require statement and you put the exact version. But if you're just like, hey, I just want the newest one, then project-wide, you can say, I'm good with dev, or nope, I need something at least in beta because I'm going to be pushing to production. You can do that. So that's the first part of controlling which version. The second part is you can ask for prefer stable. And so what that means is it looks, and it doesn't look at your minimum stability first. What it does is it says, hey, is there anything that's beta, release candidate, or stable? And it tries to download one of those first, regardless of whether there's a brand new dev version and there hasn't been a released version in 3 years. Doesn't care. It just wants a beta, an RC, or a stable. It's going to bring in the most recent one of those, the most recent commit, one of those. Now, if I'm developing, I want to say minimum stability is dev. It's a choice. You don't have to do it that way, because if you do it, if you say your minimum stability is dev or alpha, which are not stable releases, and you say I prefer a stable release, then it tries stable releases first, and then goes to dev releases second, if it cannot find a stable one. So if the package is out there, it brings in something. And there are still some, quite a few Drupal 8 contrib modules that don't have a stable release of any kind. So if you want to play around with them, you're going to need to have a minimum stability of dev, probably. Most of them don't have alphas. Some people don't even use alphas. So yeah, I don't know. So I'd recommend dev. That's a little bit of the cart before the prefer stable true thing that we did there. But all we're doing is modifying our Composer config file for the project at that point. So the next thing we do is we're going to require a few projects to make everything happy. One of those is Composer installers. Composer installers, you would think maybe it should just be in there automatically, but it's not. You're going to use it for just about every project that has dependencies. And what it is it is a official Composer plugin that when you are defining a Composer project, something that you would pull in, you'd say what kind of package type it is. And this Composer installers plugin uses that package type to determine where to stick it. It's bringing that package in, and the default place to put it is something called a vendor directory, which you're going to see. But with the example like a Drupal theme, you say the package type is a Drupal theme, and it takes it and it puts it in the themes folder. Someone that you don't know is keeping Composer installers up to date with, what package types belong to Drupal and all kinds of other projects, and then where it's going to put those files. So the Drupal ones are Drupal core, Drupal module, Drupal theme, Drupal library, Drupal profile, Drupal drush. There's a list on the Composer installers GitHub project page, and it's also in here. That list could change. They could add things. They're probably not going to take any away. In fact, they won't take any away. They could add them. So that's what Composer installers does. The next thing is there's kind of in a pair, but I'll talk about one of them first. As you're listening to all this, you're going, okay, this is great. I have this project, and I haven't told it that I want Drupal yet. I mean, I told it where to find Drupal with the Drupal repository, but how do I get Drupal? And the answer for now, and I think going forward, is something called Drupal/core. You'll see Drupal/Drupal in places, but that's not what you want. All you want is, well, it's not all you want. It's the same thing. You want Drupal/core. And what it is an automatically, it happens, I don't know, there's some sort of a batch process that occurs that splits out what you call scaffolding files. So your settings and your services .yaml and your index.php, htaccess, all those fun things that you don't really know where they go, but they're settings for your site. Those are scaffolding files. Because we're going to use Drupal core, because we want to be able to selectively update things, we're going to need to use Drupal Scaffold, or Drupal Composer's Drupal Scaffold, which is just it's a plugin. It's got some scripts, and what it does is it goes out and finds those scaffolding files separate from all the rest of Drupal core. That sounds all kind of shady, and you're going, what? Why would they do that? The people that know what they're doing are doing it that way. And that's kind of the best I can tell you. It feels kind of weird. I don't know that there's going to be a different way to do it, but I can't promise you there won't. For now, it works, and it's going to be supported going forward. So Drupal Scaffold, and there's more information in the README about it. Basically what it does is it pulls in the scaffolding files individually, downloading them from the head of the version of Drupal, the head commit of the Drupal version that you're in, which is kind of weird. You need to read the way they put it. It's a lot better. You don't have to worry about that so much unless you're using a dev version of Drupal 8, a non-numbered release. Yeah, it kind of works in a weird way, but they explain it. So that's what Scaffold does, and I've also just talked about core, which is, I guess it's sliding up there slowly. So we're using a command called composer require, and I kind of should have said this before we started. In the repository that I'm speaking from and has this walkthrough in it, there's a cheat sheet that kind of talks about each of these commands that I'm talking about in the presentation. The top of this one, there's a much better cheat sheet link to some cool stuff, but it's like all of the commands, so that can be really daunting. So the commands we're using today, they're the ones you're going to use most often. There's a composer cheat sheet in here for you to use them. And so composer require is on there, and I apologize for not saying that earlier. So 2 of the projects we want to use pretty much all the time for making a Drupal site: Drupal Composer, Drupal Scaffold, and Drupal core. They're intertwined. Okay, so you see, well, I already have Drush installed. Why I'm installing Drush? The short version is it prevents problems. Since certain modules, or even, basically certain modules, could have dependencies on Drush, some of the development modules, things like that, you want to make sure that your version of Drush that you keep with the site is in version control. You want to make sure you're keeping track of which version of Drush. As an easy example, if you're trying to do a Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 site on the same development machine, you're going to have issues because they need different versions of Drush. So you want to have a site-specific installation of Drush. Kind of a pain in the butt, honestly. I prefer just being able to type in Drush to do whatever I wanted to do in Drush. But it's better not to. You can set it up to do that. Again, you can do some neat settings and stuff, but you're going to have to find out how to do that on your own, because you get really bored listening then. So I have a link to how to do that. So since you have a site-specific installation of Drush, it's in the vendor folder, which is where all the things go that are not themes and modules and whatever else. And you can call it directly from there and do whatever you want to do with it. I don't have a lot more to say about that.
Doesn't Drush actually search for that first?
Search?
What I understood is if you have a global Drush installed, that if you call that, it first checks
Oh, it might.
if you have a local specific one installed.
I may
It
have,
actually calls that instead of the global.
my global drush may not be set up correctly because it didn't work that way for me.
Okay.
But that isn't to say that it isn't. I mean, maybe it should. Maybe
But
I don't.
It won't find it in the web folder, right?
Well, if you
Because
are
it's
in the web
vendor
folder.
in the
Uh-huh.
up one.
That's true.
I think you can do a setting. There's like in one of the templates that we'll look at, which is, oh gosh, it's Drupal Composer, Composer Drupal, whatever. It's on the list, and I'll show it to you guys in a second. It looks like you can do individual settings for your installation of Drush to make it to where you just type in Drush in all of the directory and it'll work. But for now, no. Anyway, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. There's probably a better explanation than that. But if you go to if you just type in vendor bin and Drush, or if you're in the vendor folder, you just type in bin and Drush wherever you are, it'll get there. So this is what the file should look like. Okay. One other thing that you'll see added in some templates, which we're going to look at, is a setting in your composer, your root composer file for a conflict with Drupal. Remember, I was saying we have Drupal core and not Drupal. Excuse me. This shouldn't be an issue anymore. I found some evidence that it was not, but sort of using the templates that I found as kind of benchmarks, they're still in it. It hasn't been removed, and it doesn't hurt anything. So you'll probably want to add it to your project. We were talking about Drupal Scaffold before. That's a plugin. In order to be able to use that plugin, you have to add something in a scripts section in your composer file. And to run that script from anywhere from your root down, you type composer Drupal-scaffold, or you could name it something else if you wanted to. And that will make it run, which essentially, barring other settings, it will bring in all the new scaffolding files. You can set that script through some easy settings to not pull in all of the scaffolding files if you want. It just kind of depends on how you set things up. Going with the default is always safe. It'll overwrite your files, and then you git diff them and make sure that nothing changed that you're really worried about. Okay, so every time we've made a new composer file, we kind of get towards the end, we're like, oh God, finally it's almost over. You need to composer validate. If you don't do this, composer will still yell at you. It'll still give you all kinds of good error messages, but this is a good place to start, and they recommend to run it every time. They say before you commit your composer file and before you tag a release. I'm like, okay, sure. So you run composer validate, and it finds stuff. You'll see all kinds of errors come out of it. If you forgot a quote, or more often there'll be strange, what would I call it, versioning stuff. And then you kind of Google that and find out what happened. So we did that, then we initialized the Git project, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's great. So I'd recommend, if you're new to this, to open this up at home and go through it. You have some time, or if you're doing it right now and you have some questions at the end, totally ask. There could be some crazy stuff going on. I don't know. I've been through it a couple of times, but you know, it's on my configuration, and I could have screwed something up. In the list, so sorry, I want to talk briefly. We're getting towards the end, kind of. I could keep going, but we're getting towards the end of how long I will talk, probably. In the ADUG from scratch build repository that's in the meetup page and that was on the screen, you'll see a composer cheat sheet, and you'll see a relevant links PDF, which are these relevant links to other projects that you may want to come in and look. So one of them that I've done is, I'm getting ahead. So that's core, sorry, that's scaffold, looking for, oh, well, I'll just go to this. So Drupal-composer / Drupal-project. is when you're looking up on the internet going, oh, okay, I went to this thing, I don't know what the hell's going on. You'll run across this over and over again. And it's kind of a standard way to start a Drupal project right now. It's more complicated than what I just showed you. It's, I looked at it and went, okay, well, I don't know what all this stuff is doing. And it's going to be hard to see up there. But it does things like pulling in, oh, I totally skipped over require dev, but let me finish this thought first. So it does things like pull in packages necessary for testing and unit testing and all kinds of testing that I don't understand completely. It pulls in those things. It also does a thing where it checks Composer's version, which is actually very interesting. You can go and what's good about viewing this package, in my opinion, is you can trace it. You go through and you can look at everything they've done, and you see all the code, and it's there, and you see that they're pointing to, you know, a function in Composer, and you go and you check it out, and you're like, oh, okay. And one thing this project does this package does that is kind of looks like a standard way we may be going, is it does something different than the vanilla install directory structure. So normally in your root of a Drupal site, you have your index.php and an htaccess, and I don't know, now there's some lint files, there's other various config files, and then you have a sites folder, and you have, now I'm trying to think of the other things, lots of stuff. It seems like with this project and another one that's on here, which is the Acquia Lightning project, pieces of core, let me see if I can say this right, not pieces of core, well, yes, core is being put underneath a lower directory than the root project directory. So the root web directory is lower. I don't know, maybe it's higher. Whatever, it's after it. And so looking at this project, you see that they're putting everything in something called web. And then in some of the other projects, they're putting it in doc root and things like that. I just encourage you to investigate why they're doing that. If you're looking to use Aegir or some of the managed hosting right now, they won't play super nice with this, or they might by today. It's something they're all kind of looking at and going, I don't really know how we're going to do that. Because it kind of monkeys with some of the tricks and things they do to make stuff go faster. However, this project uses it, and it's a good thing to kind of, it demonstrates some things to you, which is nice. No, we don't need to talk about that. The Lightning project I mentioned. So also in these projects, if you need to do patches, there's a package you have to import to do patches in the Drupal way, and it's fairly straightforward. You can pretty much copy paste what you can find in other people's projects to figure out what to do there. Okay, last thing I think. So under Jeff Cardwell on GitHub, there's something called ADUG project build with profile. So what I've done in that project is there's a simple ADUG README in there that only gives you this. It's not as commented out as the other one. It's just like, hey, here's what I did. And this project uses the one I was just talking about, which is Drupal Composer, Drupal Project. And then kind of just requires a simple profile. Just it kind of shows you how to import a custom repository. So something that you're not going to publish to Packagist, something that you may have on your own GitHub stuff. If you're doing things for a client, it can be a private repository or whatever, but it shows how to bring in something that isn't in Packagist and isn't in Drupal Packagist anywhere. And also, it's got all kinds of the other stuff in it. Now, that reminds me. So this all sounds great, and maybe you've used Drush before, and you're going, all right, yeah, I mean, this all just totally transfers over, and I can make a profile, and then I'm going to have a bunch of features or whatever, and then I'm going to have that profile put in those features, and that all sounds great, and it won't really work. It won't work the way you think it would. So something about Composer is that I've kind of glossed over the private repository thing, but it's a very important part, is to have a private GitHub repository or GitLab or wherever, or any other kind of version control repository that you want to pull the code in from. You wrote this code. It's your code for your site. When we're making the package for this entire site, which has a dependency on Drupal and a dependency on Drush and all of these other things, you can add a dependency to a private repository in that Composer file. And any of the Composer files all the way down the line to the tiny brown box, if anything else wants a private repository, it does not get it. You have to declare that private repository in your root file. And there are ways around that, but none that are free, basically. And yes, there are free ways. They cost time. I think the reason, well, I think there's several reasons, but I think one of the reasons is the nature of Packagist is that it has these unique vendor names. And the recurrence all the way from the giant box to the tiny box, looking at all the Composer files at all of their possible private repositories, and it takes too long, it's too complicated, is pretty much the answer that I read. There are ways around that. One of them is called Toran, which is T-O-R-A-N, which is you pay for it. And you can find that through Composer because the same dude runs it. And if you're going to be using it for business use, it's not a bad idea. I think you can get a license if you're a one-person shop, just for you. Haven't investigated that completely. And then there's something called Satis, which is S-A-T-I-S, which is open source, which does mostly the same thing. And you can run it on your own machine, but it's also, there's some caveats with it. So yeah, so that's how you kind of fix it. But the thing to remember is my workflow, the way I did things in 7, was I'd have a make file that then went and picked up a profile. And that profile would have a make file that then went and picked up a bunch of features that were their separate repositories somewhere. That if you do it that way, you'll need to add each of those features in your root Composer file. That's kind of confusing. I'm going to stop talking and see if anybody has any questions or if they're still awake. Sorry, there's a lot of material, and I hope that you go back and do the demo if you need to. And yes, does anyone have any questions I remember?
You accepting pull requests?
Yeah, sure.
Cool, I got 2 open.
Nice.
It's really good. I walked through it, and it's nice. I installed some modules. And
okay, cool.
Suggested like maybe demonstrating that, stuff like that.
Okay.
But you don't have to.
I'm not gonna do it now because I'm in a.
Yeah, you got it.
What's it called? The not logged in version of Chrome, so that random messages don't show up.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah.
Keep the presentation pristine. Got it.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but yes. Yes.
What would happen if you just copy pasted a JSON file? Like you make the Composer directory, just take a JSON file from somewhere else, put it in there. What would it do?
It'd be fine.
Yeah.
You totally do it that way.
Would it just remake the composer.log file?
Well, okay, so if you already have a composer.json file in there, and you paste over the top of it with a new one, you'd run composer update file. It would uninstall a whole bunch of junk and install a whole bunch of new junk, assuming that they're different. And yeah, you basically completely rebuild the project. And yeah, you can do it. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it'd be the same thing as just editing the JSON file at any time. It doesn't care much. It doesn't do anything live with that file. It'll throw you errors once you start trying to update and install. It'll explain why you can't do that yet, or you've got some weird dependencies and your lock file doesn't match, and it'll say those things. but that JSON file doesn't actually do anything until you run update or install.
Okay.
So yeah.
Just be sure to update the author with your name. And you'll be good to go.
Okay.
That's what I was gonna go.
Yeah, otherwise it'll still say Jeff.
Does it still say? I thought I put it in that said someone else, or just like your name. I think that's
Your-
what it
your
says. That's
name.
what it says in the demo is like your name here. But and I think that Composer goes and finds your Git name if you have Git installed, because I never told it what my name was and it just knew. So yeah, it's creepy. So I think it just went and looked at Git.
It's watching.
Anybody else?
It's all command line on the Unix shell system. It's not the Windows command line.
You can use the Windows command line.
Same command.
Yes, same commands. Your install procedures will be different, but yes, everything I showed you should work on the Windows command line. You may run into some other issues, but those commands are the same across all versions of Composer.
Do you need Bash?
I don't know if you need it
Okay.
or not. I would say you probably don't need it, but you probably really want it. Is that a fair answer? I mean, I don't know. I haven't ever tried to do any of this on a Windows machine, just because I'm scared to try.
Yeah,
Um,
keep avoiding the Windows discussion, dude.
I mean, I have a Windows machine that I updated a few weeks ago to 10 finally that I hadn't turned on in a year and a half. And it took me a while to remember the password, but yeah, a lot of people do it and make it work, but I'm not one of them. Sorry. Yes.
If I have questions, how do I get in touch with you?
On Slack?
Yeah.
I think actually my email is in the file, in the JSON file on here. But yeah, Slack works, or emailing me works.
Cool.
Cool.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. Okay, stop sharing. Or are we going to talk?
Yeah, you can end the broadcast.
Okay. Oh, wait. Yeah, okay, there we go.